Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of My Creative Life with Kelssweetie, where we read books and we make art. Today, we are talking about my favorite topic, which I've talked in depth about in my March TBR, but we are talking about the monstrous feminine. We're talking about the femme fatale. We're talking about femme horror today, but specifically in the monstrous feminine and the conversations that come up in Barbara Creed's 1993 book, The Monstrous Feminine. I still have to read said book. It has just been brought to my attention that this book exists and it studies film and how femme horror is, the archetypes of femme horror have been alive and well in one way or another in film since the age of time. And that, of course, those films reflect reality. I'm really excited, and I'm going to actually, after this, I'm going to basically order the book, because now that I'm aware of this, I really realized, one, looking through my shelves, which as you can maybe see are a bit of a mess because I've taken down all these books, some of which, almost all of which, are some of my favorite. And now I'm really obsessed with just learning more about this. Yes, she's going to read a nonfiction. Who is she? But I really do want to talk about these, of course, as it is Women's History Month, and talk about how these femmes show up in horror and through these different archetypes and why these archetypes exist and everything, as much as I can from my research. I would like to take some time out just to do a brief shout out to Scary Zara Mary on Instagram. Her monstrous feminine post at the beginning of the month really introduced the theory to me and also just got me absolutely interested in this essay. And now I'm obsessed and really want to look further into what all of this is and see how it affects my reading, how it's been affecting my reading even by accident. So I just wanted to give that little shout out. Go follow them over there. They make really great pieces and they're posting, of course, a lot of great content for Women's History Month. So yeah, let's get into this one. As you can see, it's probably gonna be a lengthy one. I'm not gonna say I'm gonna try and get it into 30 because as we've learned, that just jinx it. So let's get into it. Mentioned in the intro, this video is based on the essay by Barbara Creed, her 1993 essay called The Monstrous Feminine. It's a study of women in film and how, and especially in horror, and how these archetypes mirror like history, mirror psychological psychosis, and really how women show up in society and are viewed in society through these archetypes of the monstrous and the monster and the horror and the villainous and all of that, which are all things I love. I love. So we are going to move through some of the archetypes. There are, I believe, 7 of them, but there were about 5 that I really felt like my personal library reflected and that I had a very strong reflection to. I felt like a couple of them felt a little repetitive in my opinion, but again, I still need to read the full essay. This is from the research I could glean from being online and looking things up. I'm buying the book so that I can kind of know a bit more, but I really didn't want the month to pass and not base doing a femme RECS and femme horror recommendations video. I really wanted to base it off of some of the archetypes and themes within that essay. So let's get into it. I'm really excited to share this with you. To start off is something that's more so akin to the ghostly woman. So this does not mean that this woman is a ghost. It's more so a metaphor of wanting to be seen, wanting to be desired, needing to be desired. And that is where the ghostly woman archetype basically comes from. I have 2 recommendations in regards to that archetype, this need to be desired, this need to be viewed, that manifests in either a seduction or an actual rage. So this is the ghostly woman because, in all honesty, what do ghosts want more than just to be viewed and to be a spectacle? To start off is something a bit more specific to the ghostly woman, and that is Mother Thing. I have kept this in my personal library for quite some time. I read it, God, at the beginning of last year. It feels like it was nearly 2 years now. I read it, and while I don't say, I love to say that while I didn't necessarily have the most amazing time reading it, because the ending is truly, like, the last 15 pages are just like out of here, and everything before it is kind of like slowly moving through it, through the motions of like this woman who is really, really starting to go insane because her partner has a huge Oedipus complex towards his mother who has just passed. She ended up taking her life. She was very much what we'll be covering later on, which was something more of the mother trope, and really just took over his entire being, and he is caught up in this very, very bad depression that is now affecting her, and even her obsession with the mother who never really approved of her. She's constantly, even in her death, feeling like she's haunted by this ghost who is saying that she's just not enough. And in the last, like, I want to say 15 pages, it goes off the rails. She completely loses it. But I feel like the mother, more so in Mother Thing, is demanding to be seen at all times, no matter what. There is this anger and rage in her that feels like everything is just never enough, and therefore she is absolutely needed. She needs to be wanted. She needs to approve of it all, because if she is not the one who is to be approving everything, then how can she ever be considered approved? Be at, have some sort of power. It really is a conversation in regards to power. So that's my first recommendation, is Mother Thing. Again, I think that I've kept it because it moved me. It truly did move me, and the conversation that is brought up, especially at the end of this novel, is really insane and interesting. Even though at the very end I was like, what is happening? And I think that I want to say that I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it. It was one of those weird books. So that's our first book. Hey y'all, I wanted to hop in here really quick and also mention that our main character also is an amazing example of this ghostly woman trope, mainly because, one, she never feels truly seen. She doesn't feel seen by her partner. She doesn't feel seen by society. She feels constantly walked all over. And this ending where she finally absolutely loses it really is in reference to her no longer wanting to just be ignored, no longer just wanting to not be enough, and seeming like not enough to her partner, to everyone else in her life, to even a woman that she's taking care of like she is her own mother, to her own mother, and everything. So I also wanted to hop in here really quick and mention that it's kind of a double header in regards to this trope. While I feel like the mother is the obvious choice for this trope, just being a ghost herself, I do feel like she may, in reference to her son, who has the Oedipus complex, actually be more of the mother trope in this situation. Okay, back to the video. My second book recommendation for the ghostly woman trope is A Certain Hunger. Now, this one may not seem very specifically ghostly, as in Mother Thing, where we were literally talking about a ghost, but our main character within this book, Dorothy Daniels, I had to be reminded what her actual name was. Dorothy Daniels is obsessed with being a spectacle, with being seen, with being not necessarily approved of, but she can't walk into a room and you not know that she's there type of energy. She ends up, of course, you might have heard of this, she's a food critic who ends up eating her partners. She ends up eating men. It's a huge, it's kind of her self-written memoir from jail. She talks about how she ended up where she ended up and her backstory and all of that. What is interesting about this is that while Dorothy loves to kind of put off this kind of air that she does not care about men, that she does not care if she is, under the male gaze, she does this in retaliation and rage of not being under the male gaze for as long as she was in her earlier years, and also to feel like she has this power over men that they don't know about, especially considering that the men that she usually is dating are dating are usually very much like, I'm the one in control in this relationship. And she's like, you thought. So I think in this situation, she would fit under this ghostly woman trope in the conversation of this need to be needed, this need to be wanted, this need for power and to feel powerful, even though she may not be at the center of where that power emanates from. It's very much based on the idea that others give her that power, that others are going to provide her that power. And that's really what the ghostly woman trope represents, is a woman who needs another in order for her to feel in control and feel power, even if no matter how that's come about, like whether that's them actually showing her that power, her taking their power away from them in order for her to feel powerful. That's kind of where this trope emanates from, and I definitely feel like the latter represents Dorothy Daniels in A Certain Hunger. I loved reading this. I know that it's hit or miss, especially because of all the words and the pompous language and stuff, but for me, that kind of set the scene to who Dorothy really was. And also what I thought was interesting is that Dorothy ends up kind of really showing her true colors, not necessarily to another man, but showing them to her quote-unquote like best friend who's a shut-in artist near the end of the book. That is our first trope, and that is the ghostly woman. Please also note that I'm kind of renaming some of these to better fit for how I kind of viewed them. I know that ghostly woman trope isn't necessarily what's used. I think the possessed mother is what's used instead. But for me, like, this idea of the ghostly is just more visual. So, like, do not do not watch this and go, this trope is not in the book. Once again, I still have to personally read the essay, and I know that from doing the research I was doing, this is how I better fit some of those tropes on how, like, I better kind of saw them. So I wanted to put that disclaimer just for a moment as we're going through, before we get too far in, just to make sure that you guys aren't using this as a, like, step-by-step guide. I really do say go read the actual essay. I just have not been able to, and by the time I would have gotten it, I would not have been able to do this video in time for Women's History Month. So just want to put that disclaimer as we move on into the next trope. The next trope is the monstrous womb. So this really has to do with the idea of the is a monster. What comes out of the is a monster. The itself is a monster. You know, we have so many examples of dentata in stories and in movies. I think the best well-known one is the movie Teeth. Which of course was kind of passed around like lore when it came out around my age, and the idea that like a woman's insides could eat somebody up, but also the idea that you could birth something that is monstrous as well. And my two recommendations in regards to that is Queen of Teeth and Nestlings. Both of these kind of represent both the hardware of the womb and what comes out of the womb, both being monstrous. And of course, this is in reference to the fact that a lot of men, while feeling and observing and being attracted to as actual sexual, whenever you start to talk about it in the idea of the medical, you get squirmish. There's a fear there, which makes absolutely no sense, of course, but that is, of course, one of the tropes that we are talking about, and that is the monstrous womb. People do not want to know about the handiwork of how a baby is born. They just want to know about what happens for it to start moving, for the conception. But after conception, people want to be left out of it until the baby comes back into the world, and then we're done with it. And both of these books, I feel like, cover that trope very well. Of course, Queen of Teeth by Haley Piper talks very specifically about dentata. We're talking about Yaya Bentacourt, who is in this, it's not dystopian, but it's this future world, and they all of a sudden one day start to discover some teeth sitting inside their, and as the next 2 days go on, it grows. it grows, it becomes a part of her, and it actually takes them over. For to be honest, and kind of this very Haley Piper loves Godzilla, and that is very obvious in what happens in the endings of this book. I still think about this book every day. It is a very short novel, but I feel like it is the perfect example of how to write a very great novella that I feel like doesn't moves perfectly through the story and does not feel like it's over overcompensating for itself, or it's too short and not compensating enough. I absolutely love this, and as somebody who's a little squeamish when it comes to body horror type of things, I didn't know if I was going to very much care for this, and then I fell in love with it. I cannot recommend it enough. It is, if you are into monster Godzilla horror, I recommend this to you. If you are into femme horror, I recommend this to you. If you're into queer horror, I recommend this to you. If you're into like a sci-fi futuristic still recommend it to you. It fits so many different genres and ideas into what's arguably no, not even arguably, it's a short novel. It's a shortish novel. It's a novella. Talks about so much in one novel, and I didn't finish it going, I wish I had more. Just like, I was completely satisfied, and I cannot recommend it really enough, and I could not think of a better book to represent the monstrous womb trope. On the other hand, the other recommendation that I have is more so in reference to the baby that comes out of the womb, the more specific monstrous womb as far as the evidence of said womb, and that is Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. While this is at its root kind of a vampire novel, although they never call themselves vampires, the word vampire is never used, and even the idea of the vampire is a very classic idea of one, rather than the fanged vampire from Dracula that we've come to know. It's more like this antenna-like type of thing, that I think the first time I'd ever really heard of it was from Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. That idea of this antennae, rather than, which honestly is just grosser in my opinion than this like fanged vampire type of thing. What I really, really loved about this is just that it really talked about the blood-sucking nature that can come with having a child, and not necessarily, I guess it depends on who you are when you're reading it, whether you kind of see that as negative or just simply truthful. You know, you are basically, your entire existence, especially once you first have the child, is your entire existence goes around keeping that thing alive. And that can be absolutely blood sucking. And even when you think about the idea of breastfeeding, like, it's literal sucking of life from you. You are giving life as they suck it out of you. And I think that that was a really great way to kind of take the story further and to talk about those who may not be ready, and also kind of talk about postpartum depression in a way that was a little bit more creative than being very specific in regards to it. There's so much that's talked about in this, and even what more so what happens to the neighbors next door to our main character in the book, and the demise of the mother who lives next door, and her baby and everything. I think it really is a great example of the monstrous womb in the case of the end result of that monstrous womb, or what happens within the womb creating a monster, and that this like womb is a monster maker of sorts, rather than just the actual like medical idea of the and how it can feel monstrous and scary for many people, unfortunately. And so those are my two recommendations for the monstrous womb conversation and archetype. The next archetype that I have is one that is the oldest archetype, and that is the mother. The mother archetype. It doesn't even need to have some fancy name for it. It is the mother. There is a fear of a mom that comes from either respect, but also power. The fact that this person, this human, has made you, and therefore you always feel like they also have the power to destroy you as well. The idea of doting to death is something that is also really apparent in the mother archetype and horror trope. And I have two examples, one more of a thriller, but in my opinion, a bit more horrific in how I read it, but also in one of a classic of the mother trope, in my opinion, and that is Stephen King's Misery, as well as Jean Hanif Corlitt's The Plot. Both of these have great examples, I feel like, of the mother trope of doting to death, of this power struggle that comes from a mother, of course, you know, from many different fears in regards to us and our mothers and our connection to our mothers and the idea of the mother monster. So to start off with is the more obvious example, Misery by Stephen King. This, of course, this kind of says this is kind of the groundwork for a lot of mother type horror that isn't necessarily a specific mother. Of course, you know, we have Annie Wilkes, who is taking care of what's his name? Paul Sheldon. She's taking care of Paul Sheldon, per se, and in her efforts of taking care of, she is killing him. and absolutely needs to take care of him no matter what. Again, that doting to death concept. And even in the book, which I don't think is really experienced much in the movie or talked about as much in the movie, Annie Wilkes is a past pediatrician nurse and was unfortunately was a pediatric serial killer, being a nurse in peds. So that was a lot, but of course it comes back to this conversation of doting to death. She, in the book, is talking about how she was saving those children. And this is something that comes up a lot in mother horror, is this idea, and you know, in many cultures too, in regards to monsters, in regards to mother. You know, La Llorona in Mexican culture. You know, this mother who killed her children, and this idea of also saving them within her grief, within her doting, you know, overtly so. Munchausen's by proxy, you know, this is something that's an actual mental disorder. But within Misery, I feel like it is a great example of the idea of the mother, without specifically saying they are a mother. I think in mother horror, we love to kind of go like, oh, they have to be a mom. And I think the concept of mothering is more so at work in the trope rather than, you know, actually needing to be a mother. Again, this idea of trying to take care of somebody so much that they could literally die from it. So I always loved the movie Misery, and then I finally read the book, and I'm like, the movie's fine. The book is better, which I feel like has happened with every Stephen King novel I've read so far. I felt like Carrie was better than the movie, Misery was better than the movie. The Shining is so much better than the movie. I get why King was so upset with that rendition, for many different reasons. I feel like it really just did not show like what the novel was really trying to get at, personally. But again, Misery, perfect for the mother trope. The second recommendation I have is The Plot. I recommend this book nonstop, and I've actually picked up the sequel, which is the sequel to The Plot. I'm trying to keep my expectations low, but I have not gasped at a book like when I gasped at this. I have never been more surprised by a plot twist. I am not going to share too much about this book per se, because I feel like if I do, it will ruin really anybody who reads this book, and why I love this book so much is that I went into it blind. I will simply say that the mother trope is very specifically thought out and happens in this novel. And it's a huge part of the plot. It's a huge part of the novel itself. And I cannot recommend this book enough. I know that is like the weirdest recommendation I could ever do, where I'm like, can't really talk about it, but highly recommend it. But just know that the mother trope is strong in this one. Very, very strong in this one. And it really talks about, you know, that doting to death and doting in spite of, even. Like that there can be so much anger towards this child that you created, that this mother has so much anger towards the child, the creation that she's created, that it can manifest itself in this monstrous undertaking because of many different feelings and emotions. That is all I can share with you. Pick up this book. So many more people need to read this book. I absolutely loved it. So that is The Mother Trope. We are making it through. I think we're halfway through now. So although this is a very tall stack, we're halfway through. The next trope is one that I feel like there's got to be a better term for, but I could not think of something snappy enough. So we are just going to say the femme fatale. However, I feel like when you say things like the femme fatale, it brings to mind a certain character, a certain woman, like assassin type. And I just personally don't feel like it's the most perfect idea of the femme fatale. I've heard people describe it as a scary little girl. And even then, when I have heard people say that, they're like, I couldn't think of a better title for this. And even in the essay, I think it's pronounced as I think it's a feminine castratus or something like that, like the castrating of femininity. And even that doesn't feel right. It has to do with puberty though, y'all. The many different stages of puberty. Some of my favorite books have to do with that. So, to start off, we're going to get into The Exorcist and My Best Friend's Exorcism. So I'm kind of recommending these as a unit because in all honesty, one informs the other. Of course, The Exorcist came out first. I cannot recommend this book enough. I know that it's a classic and people recommend it constantly, but it's not overrated. I read this and I was shocked by how forward-thinking it was, especially for the time that it came out. It has to do with a single mother, which of course you would go, oh, is that not the mother trope? No. Furthest thing from the mother trope as far as our main character's mom is concerned. You may go, oh, Reagan, the monstrous womb? No. No. Because although she is the child of the mother, what she is, she's not a monster because she was birthed, but rather it is a reference to her going through puberty. The exorcism really is just a huge metaphor for the idea of going through your first stages of puberty at 12, 13 years old, which is how old Reagan is in this book, in this novel, and the idea of womanhood and what all of this is, the sexualization that comes with turning a certain age, and all these different smells and things that are starting to happen to you that can truly feel like it is possession. And that's one of the main metaphors in this novel. I put this in conjunction with My Best Friend's Exorcism because of course you can really tell when you read Grady Hendrix's novel that he was informed by The Exorcist. As we go through the whole idea of our main character, which one is it? Abby? No, it's Gretchen. Gretchen, who is the one who becomes possessed in this novel. Her and her best friend Abby start to split and have issues, and she notices that Gretchen is acting very different, that she is acting possessed. Of course, in this novel, she is possessed, but in the grand scheme of what the metaphor is supposed to be, it really is the idea, again, that puberty, and that puberty that you're going through you go through puberty. For those who don't know, you don't go through puberty only once in your life. While it may be a biological puberty that you go through many different puberties throughout your life, which is really just this growing into a certain stage of your life, to be honest, growing pains of that. So this represents another puberty that you go through, which is not necessarily your first one, but it has to do more so with your friendships as you go into high school. It's friends that used to be your friends and made sense in middle school, you start to grow apart, you start acting different, your best friend starts dating some jock or whatever, you get left behind, maybe she's starting to wear makeup, she's going to parties, whatever the case is, she's just not acting like herself anymore. And he took that and turned that into an exorcism and a possession. Again, possession is the best reference to puberty because it's the same thing, especially inside of a woman. So I do recommend both of these. If you ever decide to pick up one, I think, picking up this one is a great idea. And they're also very, like this, of course, was written in 1968, I think, is when The Exorcist was written. If I got that right, I'm going to be really surprised at myself. Nope, 1971. It's 1971, and this has to do with in the 80s. They're both very specific to their time periods and in the way, and that's a lot of fun too. Personally, I love a time period piece, as long as it's not witches, as I've talked in depth about. But I do recommend both of these as a unit because I feel like they both take on this idea of it's the femme fatale. But again, I don't feel like that is the right word. Somebody out there is going to find the right word, but I don't feel like it's scary little girl. There's no real snappy word for, maybe puberty possession? Pubescent possession. That's what we're naming this. This trope is pubescent possession is what we're renaming this trope. You're welcome. Let's get into the next rec. These next two recommendations are also talking about puberty, but in, again, another conversation in regards to stepping into oneself. One is Baby Teeth by Soje Stage. The next other one is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. Both of these have to do with going through growing pains as a woman and recognizing what those growing pains are, and in some ways just being filled with possession and rage. Again, going through that pubescent possession that I was just talking about. I love that I came up with that. Everybody use that. That's what it's used now. For one, you may be talking about, regarding Baby Teeth, it has to do with Hannah and Suzette. This blew my mind when I read it. It absolutely blew my mind. Hannah is 7 years old, so you may be going, oh, that's not puberty. It may not be puberty in the conversation of her going through body changes, but she is, one, far beyond her years mentally, and because of that, she is kind of going through a puberty of the mind. And she is in the age group for those who have it's not Oedipus, Freudian complex towards her father. She has this, I don't like my mom because she's taking a lot of my dad's attention, and I have a problem with it, and it growing into something far more deadlier. Plus, she is a sociopath and is showing early signs of sociopathy, which her father, of course, doesn't want to deal with. And then you have Hannah, her mother, Suzette, her mother, who is trying to also deal with the fact that she thinks that she may be a bad mother, and because of it may be her, she's the issue. And of course, Hannah is trying to drive her insane. Again, this is, while it's not puberty in the physical sense of the word, it is in the mental sense of the word, as Hannah is trying to sort through her feelings towards her father because of this idea that she has not grown out of this I love my dad, but I love my dad type of thing that most of us sort through at an early age, or it's very clear how to sort through at an early age. She's not really doing it, and therefore is causing her to feel horrible towards her mother and wanting to kill her and take her out of the picture in order for her and her dad to be together. This is femme fatale at its, I guess, worse, if you want to talk about it in that way, because it is representing this puberty equals poison, this knowledge, this kind of Eve apple type of situation of knowledge that shows up in this rage. Instead of towards a man, it's showing up towards her mother because she feels like she is the enemy. This is in huge comparison to The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim, who is showing puberty and this idea of a life change, but in the concept of our main character who is going into her first year of college. So Jiwon's parents have divorced. She has a huge anger towards her father on how he handled it, how he really treated her mother during that time. And then, of course, John, or whatever this white man's name is. Is it John? George? Whatever. He sucked. He doesn't matter. But he comes into the picture and, of course, is treating her mother like shit anyways as well. And this rage that she feels towards all of the men in her life. There's also another guy, Jeffrey, who is involved in here. He represents another version of men that is contemptible and an issue. And it shows up in this blackout rage, which causes her to become a serial killer and eat eyeballs. I loved this book. I loved this book. I read it this month and I could not wait to give y'all recommendations in regards to this book. And this felt like the perfect opportunity to show the femme fatale. It's more femme fatale in the more traditional sense of it, in my opinion. Like when we talk about Jennifer's Body and like more like woman unhinged, like coming of rage stories, I think are the best conversation around the femme fatale, the pubescent possession is coming of rage stories. And this is a huge example of it, especially as you're entering into your first year of college and starting to figure out who you are as an adult in those early years, because now you've left your home. And what happens as you're figuring out this new information while you're at college, coming back home and realizing things that are happening in your own household that you may not agree with, that you may have problems with, her mother being one of them. Her sister being another, and how you deal with it, which in G1's case, she deals with it by becoming a serial killer. So I highly recommend it though. Even knowing that, it still isn't, just because you know that, I feel like it doesn't ruin this book for you. It really is a book all of its own, regardless. It's not trying to keep it under wraps that she's a serial killer. It's just like, okay, and you're on for the ride. So I cannot recommend this one enough. Again, I cannot recommend Baby Teeth enough. This blew my mind when I read it. And again, that coming of rage, I think is something that shouldn't be taken specifically, like literally. Like, oh, okay, are you going through actual puberty, as we saw in My Best Friend's Exorcism and The Exorcist, but that can be a mental change as well. That puberty can be just a simple change of life type of experience. And that is how I personally understood the femme fatale, the feminine castration type of conversation. The last trope that we have also has as you can see, good amount of RECS here, and that is because it also represents something that is probably the most historical. While the mother is the oldest archetype we may know, from a historical standpoint, this trope is probably one of the top, and that is the witch. Of course, within history, within society, within politics, the witch is always and has always been men, society, trying to kill off, trying to get rid of, trying to monsterize the woman who is trying to simply be independent of men, independent of society's ideas and standards. That is the idea of the witch. And I would even take it further to say really the monster, because that's really the idea behind the witch, is creating something monstrous, creating something that's not human. So some of these books that I have here kind of get into that idea, and I'm just going to rattle them off a little bit quickly, as opposed to the other ones that are more specific to the witch. Of course, we have Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. Absolutely love this book personally. I know that, you know, it's hit or miss with who loved this book, but in this, because of our mother, our main character, I think she's just the mother. She doesn't even have a name, and that has to do with the fact of her and feeling like she's lost her identity, but she's slowly turning into a dog. And that we're creating this monster of a dog, of a bitch, because obviously that's where the dog concept comes from, because she has lost her independence from her own child, from her marriage, from all of these things. She's lost who she is identity-wise, which is also why she does not have a name. So Night Bitch is a huge conversation in regards to what I had just mentioned about what the witch really is, which is making those women who are trying to find their independence monstrous, turning into a monster here. To go on to that further idea, chlorine, again, while it may not be a dog monster, our main character is thinking that she is turning into a mermaid, that she actually is a mermaid. And of course, this comes from her idea. Of course, it really comes from the fact that she has brain damage. That specifically. But she is dealing with her bisexuality. She is dealing with sexual assault and abuse from her coach and everything. She's growing up in the Midwest as Chinese American and having, wait, hold on. Oh, that's gonna bother me if I don't figure it out. Yes, Chinese American. She is Chinese American and dealing with her parents who also have been separated, and not having her father in her life, only having her mother who's raising her as a single mother. being in love with her best friend, essentially, all of these things, but she is trying to find herself amongst all of it, trying to claim herself amongst all of it, and essentially turning her into a fish and amongst it all and everything. Again, I think that this is more so both of these situations, while monsterized from their independence, there's also a freedom in it. While we have the mother who's turning into a dog, she feels freed by the end of the book. While we have Rin, who's turning into, you know, a mermaid, a fish, she is freed by the end of the book in one way or another by this transformation of a fish, which again has to do with that idea of the witch, you know, from the movie. You know, do you wish to live deliciously? Well, these women are living deliciously. And last but not least, Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Wong. This is a literal turning into a monster blob type. Our main character by the end of the book transforms because of all of the different treatments that they were taking and all of that. Their body simply, it's very The Substance before The Substance came out. To be honest with you, but more so in the conversation, instead of a older white woman, having to do with European white standards, as again an Asian American who is dealing with a lot of different things and trying to come to terms again with their queerness and with their life and immigration and sexual assault and 5 million other things that are kind of also what are experienced in Chlorine. But in the end, there is a freedom from our main character, which again we do not ever get their name because of this lack of identity. Their final transformation into a monster, and this independence from the gaze of men and or women, the gaze of society, from being, you know, what is beauty or whatever. She no longer is a part of the idea or concept of beauty or whatever because of her becoming this monster, and therefore is freed by the idea of just simply being. And it's really, really interesting, really crazy, and I think the ending of it truly is something that was exciting, and because I feel like if it would have gone in any other direction, it might have been disappointing, to be honest. But I think that the way that this ended was wonderful in the concept and the message of being freed by no longer having to subscribe to these ideas of beauty and being independent from all of that. Now, the literal idea of the witch, I have two recommendations, both having to do with different age groups in regards to the witch. One is The Women Can Fly by Megan Giddings, and the other is Mary by Nat Cassidy. Megan Giddings' The Women Could Fly may not be considered a traditional horror, as are maybe a couple of these aren't. Like Night Bitch probably isn't considered a traditional horror, and neither is Chlorine, but both of them, they all have to do with these horrific, monstrous ideas, which we love some weird lit in here. So I would definitely put this under the weird lit category, in my opinion. It has to do with a parallel universe to our own, a parallel world to our own society, where those women who are really considered independent, who are queer, who are fill in the blank on anything that's not centering men and the idea of the heterosexual woman, mother, wife trope, have to basically put themselves into the registry as being a witch, which means that you have certain lack of rights. You have to check in, you have to be surveilled, all of this. And especially so once you hit the age of 28, if you still are not married, you basically get put on watch. And if by 30 you are still not married, you are then certified as a witch. And there's many different things that can happen in regards to that idea. It really has to do with surveillance of women and misogyny and heterosexual normatives and all this other conversation. Honestly, I cried at the end of this book personally because of many different things that were happening in this book, mainly between Jo, our main character, and her father, and the ideas that misogyny starts at home. It can start at home, and that these ideas that our fathers were brought up on, and this was something that was also something that was apparent in The Eyes Are the Best Part, is that a certain generation of men, most generation of men, are brought up within a misogynistic society, and they are victims of that society. And when they have daughters, that they can inadvertently put those misogynistic ideas onto their daughters, and those daughters Those girls, those femmes who seem to break those norms may be at odds with their parent or their father, or may also feel like they have a lack of connection to them, or that they feel like they're letting them down, regardless of the fact that all they are simply doing is trying to be independent of the idea. In this book, Joe's father may mean well, but in the end felt extremely disappointing in his reaction to just her simply being authentic to herself, which again, all of these books and the witch idea is just authenticity. It's just independence is authenticity and being monsterized for simply thinking that you could do that. And that's why this definitely fits under that trope, because by the end, Joe is painted as a criminal because of simply trying to live her life authentically. Can't recommend it enough. It's not necessarily your specific like traditional horror, but I definitely think that it fits under the trope absolutely. And last but not least, one that maybe fits that trope a little bit better is Mary by Nat Cassidy. I know that so many of you have probably heard this book is amazing and fantastic and have been recommended 500 ways, probably even by myself. I cannot recommend this enough. I cannot recommend it enough because it is amazing. It is absolutely divine. I don't know how a man, a heterosexual cisgendered man, wrote this book, but clearly, and he writes this in his afterword, it is from simply talking to women. And listening, being raised by a woman and watching and actually paying attention to it, speaking to their friends, speaking to their partner and everything, because I personally did feel that he definitely really narrowed down a lot of the fear and monstrous like ideals that come with aging out of society, out of womanhood, out of femininity. Which, of course, those all have quotation marks around them because how can you age out of these things? But that is mainly the idea behind the book Mary. Mary she's turning 50. And in a lot of different ways, she starts having these very weird dreams where things start happening to her and they get worse and worse. And they're very bloody serial killing dreams. And I don't want to really give too much more to you, but essentially she's thinking that it's not just simply her going through menopause like every single doctor keeps on telling her that she's going through. And I think that this is a huge conversation around the idea of witch, both in what Mary ends up being, both in what Mary ends up experiencing, but also the idea of independence from the idea of society and what they think that you as an older woman should be subscribing to. This is a perfect example of that, and especially by the end, what it all ends up being. And I feel like it's a perfect example of the actual trope, the witch. I don't know, I don't read a lot of witch stories, but this really, I feel like, isn't a reach to the conversation of what the witch represents, and especially whether it's specifically or literally, Mary is really, I feel like, a perfect example of the witch trope of simply independence and being monsterized for it, as were all of those recommendations under the witch trope. That is our recommendation video. I can't believe I got it under an hour, y'all. As I'm sitting here recording this, I can't believe I got this under an hour because there were so many recommendations in this book. I really thought that it was going to be like an issue of this being like a 2-hour long video. Sometimes when you got it, you got it. But I hope that you got some really amazing recommendations from this video. These, again, are some of my favorite novels, and it's because I love a femme horror. I love a monstrous mother. I love, as we've coined today, the pubescent possession. Love this idea. I'm gonna write this down. This is going to be a post. Make sure you're following me on Instagram so you can see me actually coin that and write it down, because that's the word. That's the word that we have to be using. This has really been a lot of fun picking these out and seeing what was fitting in the trope. And like I said, I've not read the essay just yet, but it is going to be in the mail. I'm going to be reading this because it is something that I'm obsessed with. It's really the theme of the monstrous feminine is something that I absolutely love, even before I knew that there was a word for it. And I cannot wait to really dive into it. And again, that is a disclaimer of a lot of these books I may end up reading the essay and going like, hey, actually, that trope or archetype is something else and everything. But this is truly how I, from me doing some research online, examined how all of those tropes were, regardless of if they are like in line with the actual monstrous feminine like essay. These tropes are real. And I feel like they all represent, of course, and what is so great about feminine horror is that it really, and what horror is really at its heart, is what society itself is afraid of, and that it simply is expanding and examining those fears within society, or those issues that are happening within our society. And there's tons of content to use within femme and femme rights and femme horror, both real and imagined, I suppose. But these really are some great books, and I'm really excited to have recommended them to you. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please like this video and subscribe down below. I, of course, have a reading vlog coming up soon. I am working on said reading vlog, so I hope that that actually turns out well, and my reading update and wrap up for March will be coming, of course, at the end of the month, beginning of next month, which should be fun because this month has already been really great. And I'll be also participating in Old School April, which is hosted by Slime and Slashers, so it'll be nothing but nostalgia. Plus, we are starting to ease up on spring, which means Halloween and holiday hunting is going to really start. So if you are somebody who is thrifty or artsy and everything, this is the part where we do art comes in. It slowly starts trickling in, coming around April, May area. So make sure that you're subscribed down below, because while I'll still be, of course, doing my book recs and book wrap-ups, we will start seeing a little bit more than just this corner constantly. So I hope that you enjoyed today's video. I will see y'all in the next one. Bye!